Yeah, I mean, the main thing I took away from what Merkel,
Merkel.
was...
She's
Meghan.
Yeah,
Meghan
Meghan.
Markle.
That's right.
She's getting involved. Meghan Markle's going, hold on a sec, I'm going to sort this out.
Queen dragged into global security scandal.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. I'm joined as ever by Jamie, but Ian's off in Spain, I think, at the moment, so we're having to settle for Ray.
He's gone drinking.
He's on the Rioja. What are we going to talk about this week? We're going to... Slight difference. I think the usual Huawei is going to come up at some stage because it has been our most read stuff this week, whether we like it or not. And we're also going to talk a little bit about UK infrastructure stuff. But we're going to head off with something a little bit different and talk about cloud gaming. But yes, before I do that, Pierre's giving me one of his looks.
I didn't. Good for you.
But before I do that, if you're watching us on YouTube or on Facebook or on the site, you can listen to us on SoundCloud or iTunes and vice versa. So, Ray, you didn't actually write about it yourself, but in your capacity as a sort of commissioning editor, you got the aforementioned Ian to write about a topic which is neither Telecoms.com nor Light Reading cover this as much as we do the core sort of vendor or operator stuff. So why don't you tell us what that was all about?
Well, the reason we wrote about the launch of Stadia by Google, which is Google's launch into cloud gaming, is because of the potential impact on communication service providers, the network operators. And in a nutshell, if you've got cloud-based gaming where all the processing and all the intelligence and activity is happening in the cloud, then for multi-gamer high definition, and this is only high definition before we get to 4K and 8K gaming, if that's going to happen on devices, in people's homes, in schools, in offices, because let's face it, people are going to play games in the office.
You mean some people slack off sometimes?
Yeah. If this is going to happen, it's going to put incredible strain on the supporting broadband infrastructure.
Yeah.
And there's two ways to look at this, and this is before we get to the latency thing. Just in broadband terms, it's really going to sort the wheat from the chaff. If this becomes popular, of course, if people actually use these games, and I think there's an expectation that these games will be popular, then they'll only really work if there's a truly high-speed broadband network connection of hundreds of megabits per second constantly, not peaking at.
But you're talking about broadband. I think this applies to mobile gaming as well.
I'm talking about fixed broadband here.
But I think it applies to both.
I agree. I think we can get onto that.
Yeah, we can get onto that because there's an expectation that 5G will not cut it.
Yeah.
So this is sort of wheat from the chaff about which network operators actually have truly high-speed, either fiber all the way to the customer, or in the cable world, DOCSIS 3.1 has the capability to deliver this, as long as the infrastructure isn't shared between too many customers. And if you're wanting to use this service and you're using service provider A's broadband, you will quickly find out whether they can actually deliver maybe what was marketed or not. And for those companies that do have a truly dedicated high-speed broadband infrastructure, this is a great opportunity for them to market themselves as, we can deliver proper Stadia, we can deliver this to you, sign up to us. So not necessarily sell it or make any money off the back of it, but basically attract the people that want to use it. In the same way, you have gamers now who go to specific ISPs, because those are ISPs, particularly in countries like Finland, in Scandinavia, and in Asia. The gaming community tend to use particular ISPs because they know they will get the broadband connectivity they need. But this is now going to go, widespread potentially with Stadia, and this is really going to sort the wheat from the chaff.
Yeah, and it's important to stress that the sort of relevance of cloud gaming. I think most people who game at all are familiar with online gaming.
Yeah.
like one of my favourite games to play is called Dota 2, which is about the biggest game commercially in terms of esports, and that tends to be played over the internet, but the resources for processing your side of things are still done locally.
Yeah.
So the critical bit that we're talking about here is not only is it over a network, not only is it over the internet, but the actual graphics processing, all that stuff, such that you could just have a completely thin client. You could have a relatively dumb, underpowered device because all the processing is being done remotely. And obviously that means there's a hell of a lot more data flying backwards and forwards than merely just the sort of post-processed visual stuff.
Absolutely. And of course, the first thing I thought of as well was, well, this isn't just about bandwidth, capacity from A to B, but also about the latency as well. But there are question marks about whether, because currently there obviously is a lot of latency discussion around 5G and the need for edge computing. But actually, the opinion appears to be divided about just how low the latency will need to be for cloud gaming over very high-speed broadband access networks. So you might not necessarily need to have the processing done, within 10 kilometers or very close to an end user. This is something that might be able to be done on a regional basis. And the clever thing about this in terms of, the USP for Google here with Stadia is that it's going to be providing these games via YouTube.
Yep.
And it already has, I think if I remember correctly, about 7,500 edge data center locations where it's all from which
globally.
It's already providing YouTube services.
So it's ahead of the game in terms of edge capacity.
It has the
infrastructure.
It has the distributed cloud, more distributed cloud capabilities than other companies that could turn around and go, oh, we'll do that as well.
Right.
They already have the infrastructure, they already have the channel in YouTube, and now they have the proposition, and now they're attracting the game developers who I'm sure are falling them over themselves to develop games for this service.
Imagine. Jamie, you were sort of bringing in the mobile element as well.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, when you actually look at sort of the complexities of the games, when you look at sort of like Xbox consoles or PC or something like that, or along those lines, they're a lot more immersive. They're a lot more detailed. So, it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. But when you actually look at the mobile side of things, I think that's where it's going to become a much more critical element moving forward. Mainly because of, I think, the foldable screens. If they do take off, this could change. It'll be a completely new dynamic for mobile gaming. You've got more real estate on the actual devices.
Right.
Means you can develop more immersive games and more complex games for mobile devices. But then all of a sudden, you still need the sort of like the real-time interactions.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you're talking about latency on sort of a broadband fixed access. But then at the same time, if you want real-time interactions, you still need exactly the same latency on these devices to make sure that you have a proper, the appropriate experience.
And it's easy to imagine in future people are going to expect there to be just a sort of seamless switch from one to the other anyway. Let's say you're some kind of complete obsessive. Let's say I'm in the middle of a game of Dota 2. I'll be playing it on my PC, but then I've got to go to work because I've got to pay the bills. So apparently you have to do that. Then I could maybe just finish off the game on my phone and accept just this seamless switch between fixed and mobile or something like that.
The big question for me is, I get this idea of latency and processing power. When you're actually talking about sort of like regional games, like say me and Ray are playing a competition. I don't know, we're playing Headball 2 or something like that, and you need it's a good game.
Headball 2.
I thought he'd made it up.
No. Like,
Ray would
it on
definitely
my phone.
play that.
It's really good.
I'll check it out.
If Ray's in Manchester and I'm in London, okay, fine.
No, make it further away. Make it further.
No.
Make it more interesting. Okay.
We're 150 miles apart, so challenging latency on that perspective isn't going to be incredibly difficult, considering we're both on the same island. But when you're playing someone on the other side of the world, you still need the two experiences to match up perfectly, and that's part of the advantage of the Xbox experience, is that you don't have to play people that are in the UK. if you're signing
Yeah.
on at 3 o'clock in the morning, you can play people that are in Japan
Yeah.
because that's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So that's where I
Right.
think the next.
It already happens. I go down when my
Well,
son's
remember,
playing.
Google has the most, I think, the biggest global, wholly owned, wholly managed, and wholly run optical network in the world.
Does it?
Yeah,
Damn.
connecting its data centers, so there isn't a hop onto other networks
Yeah.
for much of its traffic. So it can go from, even if you're in London and you're playing a game with somebody who's in Seoul or something like that, you're actually not many network hops
I see.
away.
Also,
cool.
you're unemployed, probably.
but even sort of like when you take into account physics, it's gonna add on to the latency that me and you, the difference between London and Manchester,
Yeah.
latency is going to be a lot lower than me.
But this
and
is what I was
Pierre
saying.
and-
According to some of the people who really know about gaming, they're saying that the latency aspect is not that big a deal. It's about the bandwidth,
Okay.
the aggregated bandwidth, rather than the latency. But hey, I mean, this is just based on some games that some people know about,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
the games that have been developed, or the games that might be developed in the next 2 months, and how many of them are going to be, if somebody comes up with a 4K virtual
Yeah.
reality based
Well, I was just going to say
multiplayer game,
VR.
then
There's a big one.
I
I've got
can't imagine that latency
the
is not
graphics
coming
are
into that.
higher than it's
Right.
got to give
better
a
to go
shout out
through.
to a company. In fact, talking about shout outs, before I forget, I've got to give a shout out to Hotwire PR, who me and our colleague
Oh,
Teo
that's
had
right.
lunch with.
Yeah.
Hannah, George, and Hubert. We had a little bit of sake. Very nice. Told you I would, guys. See you later.
Sake.
Right. But Play Giga is the main shout out I was going to say, and I met them at Mobile Congress, and I wrote about them in the context. I wrote a piece where I was saying 5G is a bit of a waste of time, but it might not be in the future, and one of the biggest ways in which it won't will be the low latency play. And they showed me this demo of a sort of VR over 5G. So VR, as you flagged up, I think that's where the low latency, especially on mobile, comes into play, because you can't. It's just proven that if you have more than a certain amount of latency with virtual reality, everyone starts throwing up all over the place, don't they? It just doesn't work. And that was just a good exemplar to me of how these things that we're told are a big deal, so these technologies like low latency, actually have a real life
Yeah. So I
utility.
think I'll give a shout out here to Gabriel Brown from Heavy Reading, because he came out of Mobile World Congress and said that he thought that the biggest takeaway in terms of services and applications was the potential upcoming impact of cloud gaming, and only weeks later
Right.
he's been
Fair play to the
proven
lad.
correct. So I think it is actually going to be I'm going to be genuinely interested in gaming for the first time in my life ever.
Right.
Because
I'll get you onto Dota too.
I'm sticking to Scrabble.
Well,
Once these services,
Or Headball too.
once these services actually come online and come available, then we'll find out who's able to use them as they've been developed and who can't.
Well, I think a lot of it is you actually look at the new games that are emerging, and the idea of sort of like gamifying sort of what they call like freemium content, where it's free to play, and then if you want to progress a lot more, you have to pay further and further you get along,
Or buy in-game.
or buy in game
shininess.
like Fortnite has done. And I think that sort of those sorts of titles and those sorts of sort of like strategies has just opened it up to the mass market.
I was just going to ask what the point of this is when everyone's getting along just fine with PlayStations and Xboxes. Why do we suddenly need cloud gaming? But do you think that's one of the biggest?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at the Xbox or the PlayStation experience. I mean, traditionally, what you have to do is you have to buy a bit of hardware. Great, everyone has to do that. Fine. You have to invest in that area, and then if you want a game or you want to play on certain games, you have to buy the title.
Yeah. Outright.
To
Drop
start
50
with.
quid on it.
50 quid,
Yeah.
50, 60 quid. Then, if you want any premium features or more often than not, sort of online experience, you have to buy that further again.
Add-ons. Yeah.
It's all these add-ons in games, whereas something like Fortnite, which is absolutely taken over the multiplayer
And
world.
it's free to play initially.
It's
isn't
free to play, and then and they make all their money from in-game upgrades.
Yeah.
So I think that is just open up gaming to the mass market, and the people are really buying into these sorts of games.
But also,
And soon nobody will care about politics.
yeah,
Exactly.
but also the graphics of that game look like graphics from 2007-6. That's why it's so available to everyone, because you don't need a great.
You're saying Fortnite is good.
Yeah, you don't need
Right, I
massive
see.
power.
But
That's
the
thing.
big complexity about Fortnite is that, you know, when, like, back to my example earlier, when you're marrying one-on-one in terms of me playing Ray, that's easy to do. That's easy to align the two experiences. You know, to make sure that there's no lag on one side and one player does. You know, with Fortnite,
60,
they've got to marry 64 players all at the same time, that's an immensely complicated. All you need is one person, and he's had a terrible experience, then he's logged out of the game.
Yeah.
I mean, it's from a technology perspective, it's immensely complicated.
I guess.
I just want to say, just in terms of the just to qualify the potential pressure and testing of these broadband connections for Stadia games, is not if there's one person like in a house, you know, playing the game, because that, you know, is expected to be 25 tops 35 megabit connection.
Yeah.
But if you have, for example, let me be the first to mention the teenagers. If you have 6 teenagers who all go round to one teenager's house and all play that game, then all of a sudden you need that 200 plus constant bandwidth going into that.
That's of course assuming that you only have one device connected up as well. You've also got aside from those teenagers, you've got 4 other people in the household
trying to watch
which
Netflix.
are four smartphones connected, a laptop watching Netflix, the connected
need a hell
fridge.
of a neck. So
Streaming 4K.
There's plenty of business yet for the for the Wi-Fi folks.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, that was one of the. A slightly side topic, but that was one of the interesting announcements over the last couple of weeks from Virgin Media. Was they were introducing a new sort of like intelligent router, which it dynamically, if it saw one of the channels was being congested, it would move them from 2.5 gigahertz across to 5 gigahertz. I think it was. I can't remember the exact numbers, but then it would
shifting channels.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the other thing it would do, it would only allocate the maximum amount of bandwidth that was required for that device. So it starts allocating bandwidth intelligently, depending on what device you actually have.
There's a lot of interesting stuff happening there with like things like mesh Wi-Fi and just this sort of evolution of having lots of little nodes around the house and them all cleverly offloading you to the most appropriate one at a given moment. And there's some other quite spooky
Makes so much
stuff
sense.
that goes on with mesh. Like, for example, it basically acts as a sort of domestic radar because it's aware of physical objects within the house somehow. So it can tell where you are. And there are like smart home applications of that. For example, if you were just, I don't know, if you were living this sort of smart speaker dream and you just go lights on, it would know which room you set it in and just turn them on in that room, stuff like that.
Oh, the great thing, there's a Google initiative from months and months and months back. I can't remember what it's called now, but they're essentially using all the Wi-Fi points around the home, or like a museum, I think was the example that they used, to more accurately map indoor sort of maps essentially. So they can actually bounce off all the Wi-Fi and off your device all the different nodes
and
sort
very
of like
similar
map
concept.
out all the corridors, so they can give better indoor maps.
See, I don't like it. I don't like it. They're just spying on you even more.
We did a piece
Stay
on
out of my house.
Nobody's even mentioned the smart light bulb yet.
We did a piece on an Israeli company at Mobile Congress that did that with sound.
Yeah,
It's like science fiction. It uses sound to know where you are.
See, we're inviting.
Not for the Israeli army.
No.
Well, we're basically inviting all these spy devices into our houses. Anyway, don't get me started. It's going to be time for the Terminator
it means we can
music in a
play
minute.
Head the Ball or whatever.
Seamlessly.
Headball 2.
Headball 2. Oh, 3. When's
Not the
3
first
coming out?
one. Not the first one.
They actually, well, so talking about infrastructure and all that sort of thing, I'm going to move it on.
Is this a segue?
It is.
All right.
Yeah. Well, there seems to be a natural hiatus. Though.
Wait, did we talk about Huawei yet?
No, we will. Don't you worry. Elephant in the goddamn room. No, but infrastructure. There's been some stuff going on this week. We've actually been writing about the UK a little bit. And I'll start with some stuff I wrote about, but I know that Jamie and Ray have both had a little look at this stuff. What was I writing about? Oh, yeah, OpenReach. They basically came out and went, you know what, maybe we should just get rid of all the copper. Now, the whole legacy BT network is, of course, tons and tons of copper, and the whole reason OpenReach is the wholesaler for fixed line for the whole country is because of its copper network. So it's somewhat jarring for it to suddenly come out and say it. But the reason it said it is because it's saying, look, everyone's always hassling us about full fibre, about fibre to the premise, or whatever we call it, FTTP.
Premises.
Yeah, premises. And they're saying, look, we're not going to pull this off unless we're all in, unless everyone goes for it. We can't be building this massive, expensive fibre network and have half the people still on copper. So they're actually getting quite draconian going. So basically, and it's a consultation, I should stress. They're not saying they're going to do anything, but they're throwing it out there, seeing what everyone says. And they're going, look, we've got to make everyone go to fibre or this isn't going to work, which I thought was an interesting sort of escalation of the whole thing. Is that how you perceived it, if indeed you tracked this particular thing, Raymond?
I mean, I didn't look into it in detail. I'm not sure what the reason behind this would be, but I think if you've got a room of UK telecom executives in, not from BT, and ask them by which year they thought copper would no longer be in the ground in the communications network in the UK, I doubt you'd get too many years this side of 2050.
Quite. Which is interesting that they're chucking it out there in 2019, just to see how about that then. I mean, their logic of if everyone's on fibre, then copper's redundant is fairly fair enough, isn't it? But that's a big if.
Yeah, that can only happen if everybody's got access to a fibre line.
Quite.
So
it's a bit chicken and egg, isn't it?
Look how far away we are from that.
What are we, about 3% or something?
Yeah, something.
No, less than that, 1.5%.
Yeah,
is it?
Something very low, but yeah.
We only just qualified
as a first world
to
country.
get on the the Fibre to the Home Council or whatever it is. We only just qualified to get onto their ranking list by going above 1% fibre penetration.
Right.
So
we're not even in the equivalent of the Isthmian League then.
Nah, we're
can't say it.
We're terrible.
Pick an easier one next time.
Right, yeah. Division 4.
Yeah. Milk Cup.
We just lost our American
why,
audience.
Ray, why are we so rubbish at fibre here?
Well, because there's never...
Big question, I know.
Yeah. Lots of reasons. It's been mainly about the economics, the lack of political and industrial pressure to do so, that has now arisen in the last couple of years. And you noticed how things have changed since City Fibre turned up and started whacking fibre in a lot of, which was a gamble, but it's paid off for them. But only when there's somebody else doing it does it. I mean, this is regular incumbent behaviour. Yeah. If you don't have to do something, you don't do it.
Totally.
I think they were originally afraid of whether people would actually buy it. Yeah. And I think the part of the reason people are willing to throw down is, well, I mean, it's a very obvious thing to say, but you got a load of.
You look at other countries. I think it's. Everybody does have to come together, but somebody at some point has to crack some heads together. And if you look at Spain as an example,
Orange across France as well. In all fairness,
yeah, I think
Spain is much further ahead.
Yeah,
but
because
I think France is doing.
The
pretty
regulator
well as well.
cracked some heads together and said, "You are going to cooperate. You are going to share. It's going to work out." And now you need to get on with it. And we're forcing you, Telefonica, to do this. And now you have to do that, blah, blah, blah. And now they're all gaining. And I would imagine, and I'm only guessing here, but I can't imagine the situation that Spain is in now in terms of its fibre to the home penetration, in terms of lines available to people. That can only help in the ongoing recovery of their economy. Yeah. And the potential for new digital business in Spain, which they would not have had 5 or 6 years ago.
I mean, the ultimate model for sort of national investment in broadband paying off in terms of the economy has always been South Korea for me, where they made a big deal of it ages ago. And
they did, but I mean, there's a massive percentage of the population there lives in
Seoul.
multi-dwelling units, and
so it's made easier. Yeah, fair
taking
enough.
big fat fibre to the bottom of buildings and then spreading it around is quicker and easier. But it needed the support, the political support, to do that.
And while I completely concede that it's a different sort of logistical paradigm, the socioeconomic effects seem to have been positive. They seem to be proven in terms of, like, you compare Korea as South Korea as an economy compared to 50 years ago, and the curve's been really steep. I'm sure it's not all just down to broadband, but I bet it's helped. And what else, Ray?
Hello.
I don't want to steal the phrase, because I know it's a favourite phrase of yours.
It
but
is.
there was another thing to do with BT that both our sites wrote about this
and it
week.
raised a smile. I think it was towards the end of last week, as in yesterday.
Yeah, right.
BT put out an announcement that it wanted to bring everybody in the UK network infrastructure ecosystem together to talk about how there should be open and equal access to street furniture. My favourite phrase.
Furniture.
Because that is the only way. So lampposts, telephone boxes, etc. Anyway, where you can place essentially a small cell or some kind of antenna.
I think street
system.
furniture should only apply to benches.
Well, absolutely, yeah, absolutely, and beds that people have thrown
And those
out.
little coffee tables that are nailed to the
That's
floor.
right. But there should be open and equal access in all locations for all operators to be able to put their stuff on. And the reason it raised a smile, yes, of course, that is a great idea. And BT, was saying that they have some agreements where they're the exclusive user of street furniture over a certain period in certain cities, and they're willing to throw that in and not be exclusive anymore.
Right.
But it raised a smile because BT coming out and say things should be open and equal access,
bit rich.
would have raised, I'm sure, more than a few wry smiles around the UK communications infrastructure community.
They're not known.
They're all going to be happy about it though. All the M&Os. Because I fired out a few emails.
Well, it
to all
depends
the
how many
M&Os.
exclusive agreements they've already struck.
See, this is the thing. The M&Os.
Everybody wants to share when other people have got more than them.
Yeah.
The M&Os are all the ones that are holding sort of like the fewest amounts of contracts. It's the infrastructure massive giants like Arqiva, which are holding a huge number of contracts. So the M&Os are all happy for open access because it's companies like Arqiva which are hoovering up all the exclusive contracts. So I've been hunting around to see if I can find a registry to get an explicit list and numbers of who owns what exclusive contracts and who gets screwed the most. And I haven't been able to find one, but all the emails that I've got back from the M&Os, from Vodafone 3, O2 and BT have said, we've got a few, but we're not 100% sure how many we actually have. BT were the only ones who came back with a concrete number and said we have 9 around the UK.
Right.
But they all basically pointed to me and said, have a look at Arqiva. They've got loads. They've got loads.
They all want. None of them want to pay Arqiva to get access.
Basically, so I think
Yeah.
Arqiva for a long time have been hoovering up these contracts around the UK, and they've been probably in a superior negotiating position than the M&Os, and they're just not happy about it anymore.
So this is a classic example of negotiating through sort of public relations rather than behind closed doors.
That's what I think it is.
Yeah.
And I think it's a great idea. Don't get me wrong. Open access, and like you say, there's probably a few people going, BT, open access. But, it's a good idea for the long run. But I think it's not the MNOs that are going to get screwed out of this if it does eventually push through. But what is also worth noting is that the European, what is it, the EEC, European Electronic Communications Code or something like that, that does actually stipulate that exclusive contracts are removed. So as soon as that actually comes into European law, and there's no guarantee, because obviously we're going through this Brexit at the moment, there's no guarantee
Supposedly.
that the UK will take on these rules as well. But in the ECC, I think it's the European Communications Code or something like that, it does stipulate that you can't have these exclusive contracts. But who knows how long it'll take to actually get this bill through to, or this proposal through to actual concrete legislation.
It's only a press release at the moment, so
Yes.
Yeah.
So there seems to be a common thread of sort of cooperation and collaboration to make this stuff happen.
everybody talks about it.
Yeah.
Well, the thing is, everyone's willing to collaborate if it's not them that's getting screwed.
Yeah. Quite.
I mean,
Absolutely.
you haven't seen Arqiva come out with support in this statement.
They didn't propose it.
Yeah, they didn't propose
Funny
it.
that.
And
It'd be like if we get to the pub after this, and then you get your round in, and then it's my round, and I go, Jamie, why don't we collaborate over this?
Why don't we
round?
have a pool?
Yeah.
Why don't
Why
we do
don't
a
we-
pot?
I think it's only fair that we share the burden for my round.
I love your analogies.
Yeah. It's the only analogy I've got are pub ones.
now I understand what he's been talking about for the last 10 minutes.
No, I'll put into words of one syllable for you. There was one other thing with the sharing. Jamie, you wrote a piece. There's something to do with the sort of rural stuff, and BT was getting a little bit of lip off people for not getting involved in the rural side of things. But you took a different angle on it. Why don't you remind us of that?
This is all PR, and as far as I'm concerned, very, very lazy journalism from from numerous other titles which covered this story.
Not us.
Not proper hacks like us.
Mainly because the three MNOs, so O2, Vodafone, and 3, put forward a proposal to DCMS or Ofcom, whichever one it was, I can't remember, saying, I propose we have a shared rural network.
That's sharing again.
Yeah, which we all collaborate in, we all put money into fairly, and it improves the sort of the rural connectivity across the entire country. Now, BT essentially said, no, we're not happy to do this. And then basically everyone else turned around, every other media title turned around and said, BT is screwing collaboration, wants to do it on its own. Basically, so if you actually speak to BT, what they said is, this actual proposal that they've put forward screws us, because EE has better rural coverage percentage-wise than all the other three MNOs, and what their proposal is shared infrastructure, but open access to all of EE's infrastructure throughout the really hard-to-reach areas. So they're saying, basically, we've got an edge from a coverage perspective, and all the three MNOs want to piggyback on our infrastructure without actually spending their own money and rolling out their own infrastructure in the hard-to-reach places. So BT essentially hasn't said, screw collaboration. They've actually said, we don't like this idea because we think it's unfair. But he said, what about this idea? So the places that are really hard to reach have bugger all coverage. You know, the genuine not spots in the UK. That's where we collaborate and have a shared pot. The areas where we've got infrastructure, fair enough. We're going to keep that. But it shouldn't be on us to help the rest of them.
When you haven't been bothered to build your network.
When you haven't rolled out your own network there. So they haven't
see that point of view.
Yeah. I mean, it's a competitive edge.
Yeah.
I mean, they've spent money so they can go to the customer. We have better coverage than every other MNO.
And at least this time they can argue that they've invested, because the long-term argument about everybody should have access to BT's copper network is that was publicly funded when BT used to be part of the post office and it was paid for by the taxpayer. Mm-hmm. This is now actually private company investment.
Is EE, essentially. So that's their argument. They're saying, look, we're happy to do collaboration, but we want to do it in the not spots where there is no mobile coverage, and we'll pool all our resources together and we'll build a shared network there. However, in the areas elsewhere, we don't think a shared network actually works. We think it will degrade performance. It'll blah blah blah. All PR stuff. But they do have a point.
Yeah,
I think it is a very fair point.
Enough. Okay, we're running short of time. Ray's got grown-up stuff to do, so I'm gonna move it along. Talking about PR. We've got to get back to Huawei. There's no escaping Huawei. So I was just looking at the stuff on Telecoms.com. I don't know about light reading, but on Telecoms.com that's had the most reads in the last week or two, because it's been 2 weeks since we did one, because you were over in Miami, weren't you, mate? How was that? Was that good?
Nice,
He went to Disneyland.
I didn't.
How's Mickey Mouse?
I didn't go to Miami. Disneyland's in Orlando. Never mind. It's like a 3-hour drive.
It's all the same.
Did you go to
swamp, isn't it? So.
Did you go to Calle Ocho?
Yes,
Coral
I
Gables?
did. Yeah.
My dad used to live in Miami. I know about Miami.
Oh.
Did you go to that building that was
Anyway,
at the start
but
of
Ray
Miami
has to
Vice
go.
with a little window in it?
No.
Anyway, okay, I digress. So that's why we weren't doing anything last week, because he thinks he's Crockett and Tubbs or something. But in that intervening time, the two stories that had the most reads, there's been one I wrote, which is headlined, Huawei CEO tries to deflect cybersecurity spotlight onto Ericsson and Cisco, which I thought was an interesting one. It's interesting to have Ray in here, because I've got to admit, certainly speaking for myself, Cisco I'm not so strong on compared to other big kit vendors, but light reading's a lot stronger because they're much more clued up about the US. What do you think about that one, Ray? Do you think, as a attempted piece of deflecting, Huawei going, how come you're not hassling companies like Cisco and Ericsson as much as you are us? Does that stand?
I think it's pointless saying it.
Right. Do you think there's any legs in it? I mean, there's some history of there being security vulnerabilities in Cisco stuff that I read about while I was researching it.
They are the only company which has got concrete evidence against them for spying.
Well, there we go.
They were it was Cisco equipment in the Snowden revealed that was being tapped for the NSA.
Right, there we go. So
Companies are companies. I
Yeah.
don't think that Huawei, as ever, is doing itself any favours whatsoever by raising these kinds of issues. Leave that for other people. There's plenty of other people who are looking at this from an objective standpoint, and I think that my view would be they don't have to be pointing this out. Let other people.
yeah,
do it.
I was going to
It's a bad defense.
Oh, I was going to say, I still think that that ultimately security vulnerability is going to appear anywhere in the supply chain, because all of a sudden you only need one person to be a nefarious actor and it compromises the entire supply chain. And due to the multi geographies and the multi companies, small, large, medium, open source, not open source, the complexities of telco supply chains nowadays means that effectively anyone can be compromised. So this is a much more bigger picture for me, but to point the finger at Huawei and such narrowly focus on one area, the vast majority of criminals in the cyberspace don't give a where the vulnerability is. If you're focusing so narrowly on China and Huawei, they're going to find.
Well, they're focusing on the Chinese state,
out.
Not just your standard sort of
which I think
cyber
is
criminal.
I think is incredibly dangerous.
Fair enough.
If you focus on China, and all of a sudden you've got some, your organised criminals in the US who they don't want to rob banks anymore because that's dangerous. So why not just hack in?
And I agree with Ray's point that it's a little bit sort of petulant, and maybe just stick to the top line legal stuff.
Yeah.
So that was that one.
I can see why they've said it, but I think leave it alone.
Yeah, what's that? What was Trump going to go around and go? Oh man, you got a point. I'm going to cut you some slack.
It was like, hey, what about the other guys?
Well, you never know with him. That might be just a sort of logic that would resonate. And then the other one was in the same thing. Germany pushing back. Talking about Trump and US. So the US. I mean, I think we're aware of this to some extent at Mobile World Congress. There's certainly been an active push by the US to sort of whisper in everyone's ears, going, "Look, man, these guys are dodgy. Don't go near them."
Haven't even bothered whispering, have they?
Right. Okay. Just shouting. But then Germany. I think you wrote this one, didn't you, Jamie? Germany's sort of gone, well, hold on a sec. US. We'll make our own mind up.
Yeah, I mean, the main thing I took away from what Merkel said,
Markle.
was
She's
Meghan.
yeah,
Meghan Markle.
That's right.
She's getting involved. Meghan Markle's going, hold on a sec, I'm going to sort this out.
Queen dragged into global security scandal.
But I think she had 5 main points. She said, first of all,
Is this Meghan?
Angela, and is that
Angela Merkel, yeah.
Angela. Yeah.
Angela, however you pronounce it. She said, first of all, I mean, stop talking about this in the public domain. These really sensitive security issues. Let's talk about it behind closed doors.
Yeah.
Secondly, she said,
Somebody can listen in.
yeah, basically, where someone with a Huawei phone can tap the whole conversation.
Wasn't there a story that the US was hacking her phone?
Yeah.
Maybe they've just gone, look, let's just be honest. We already know what you're saying. We might as well do it in public.
News of the world.
That was the CIA that was tapping her phone.
The Sun was hacking her phone.
Yeah.
But effectively, she turned around to Trump and said, mind your own business.
Right.
Long story short was,
Back off, Blondie.
Yeah, we'll make our own decisions. We don't need your input. And I think the one
Calling the bluff,
yeah,
basically.
essentially. The one really intelligent play I think she made was by calling it to be escalated to European level. Because I think if you have the individual states in the European Union going up against the US, there's a high level of risk. But put the collective power, let the European Commission take the flack off the US, and you've got the collective power of the bloc up against the trading power of the US.
And then nothing will happen for 10 years.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it'll all fizzle out.
Well, one thing I will say, I've been quite open about sort of being sceptical about the European Union. I voted out in Brexit and all that sort of thing. But I tell you, I like looking at the Google stuff, right, which I won't get to now because I haven't got time. But one thing I will say about that big bloc, when they decide to move, it's just like a super tanker. It does seem just a sort of irresistible force when they get something going. So I think I agree with both of you. I agree with you, Jamie, that it's probably a smart move to escalate it to that level. But yes, I also share your scepticism, Ray, about the pace of the glacial pace.
But my reason for it being sensible to escalate it is that the individual states can then criticise, but it's not them taking direct action against the US. So it sort of protects them.
Yeah.
But they can be critical. But then the flack goes back to Brussels, not the individual states. So you're mitigating the risk, and you're bringing the collective power of the European Union together. But the bureaucrats in Brussels, which are independent, so don't have any control over the sovereign governments, take all the flack, not Merkel.
And the chances of you catching them when they're not in one of their 4-hour lunches are pretty minimal anyway. So
on that bombshell.
On that note, okay, thank you very much for listening, and make sure you join us for the next one.